Hello, fabulous fifth graders, and welcome back. Today we're going to be talking about dividing fractions. So last week we had talked about dividing a whole number by a fraction. This time we're going to look at scenarios that go the other way around, dividing a fraction by a whole number. Let's just quickly review before we jump in. Division is splitting a whole group into much smaller parts. When we are looking for our answer, we're counting how many parts that we're able to make. So if I have 12 cookies and I'm splitting it up with 4 people, how many cookies would each person get? They would get 3, right? And so it's equal, even if that means splitting the cookies further. When dividing whole numbers by fractions, we were always getting answers that were larger than what we started with, which is a little bit different of thinking in terms of division, because usually when we're dividing, we end up with smaller sized groups. However, when we're working with fractions, our answer ends up being larger because we're taking a whole and we're breaking it up into smaller pieces and we're counting the amount of pieces that we ended up making, which is why we end up with a larger number, but the pieces are smaller. So it's a little tricky. So we had talked about this example. Where we were thinking about 2 pizzas and we were cutting them up into 3 equal groups or thirds or slices if you want. So we were talking about taking 2 large pizzas, breaking them up into 3 smaller pieces or thirds. So 2 wholes split into thirds. How many pieces of pizza did we end up making? So we end up making 6 pieces. So a little bit different that when we're starting with 2 whole groups and splitting them into fraction pieces, we end up with a larger answer of 6 because we're actually counting the pieces instead of counting how many are in each group. Let's look at a new example. This one here. So let's think about this scenario. There are 3 quarts of soup in a pot. If it is served in 1/2 quart amounts, how many servings will there be? Okay, so the first thing you want to do is to kind of think about what you're starting with. So we are starting with 3 quarts of soup. So I've now taken my pot of soup and I've split it into 3 quarts. And with those 3 quarts, I want to break them up into 1/2 quart amounts. So I have 3 whole quarts that I need to break up into 1/2 quart size servings. So I'm going to take each of my quarts and split them into the 1/2 quart serving size. So I took each of the quarts, I split them into half-size servings. So now how many servings did I end up making? So I had 3 quarts, I split them into 1/2 quart sized servings. How many servings do I have altogether? I end up with 6 1/2 quart servings. So you can see I have 6 pieces there, 6 portions of soup. So I started with 3 quarts. I split it into half-size pieces to end up with 6 1/2 quart servings. Similar to our pizza question, but instead of drawing the 3 quarts out as 3 unit squares, I broke up one pot into 3 groups and split it again. So it kind of looks like our multiplication area model as well, which makes sense because we know that multiplication and division are very much related. So kind of wrapping up this thought here, we have 3 quarts of soup divided into half-size servings. We end up with 6 total servings in the pot. So 3 quarts split into half-size pieces gives us 6 portions of soup. We could have drawn that differently with 3 separate pots and split them into halves. You'd end up with that same 6. So that first example we looked at with the pizzas, I broke the 2 pizzas up into 2 pictures and we counted the pieces. This one in the pot of soup, we did it all in one and split it up. So all about your preference. And like I said, they're very much related, right? So we could check it by doing some multiplication. So if we know that 3 divided by 1/2 is 6, do the reverse and check and see if it works. So 6 times 1/2, we know we're going to make 6 an improper fraction. So 6/1 times 1/2, that's going to give us 6/2, or 6 halves. which we can simplify to 3, which is exactly where we want it to be. So we are in good shape. All right, let's look at a different type of scenario. So this one is similar, but you're going to notice a little bit different of a process. So now there is 1/2 of a quart of soup in a pot, and 3 friends are going to share it equally. How much soup will each friend get? So now I'm starting, I only have 1/2 a quart of soup, and I need to split that with my 3 friends. So I'm going to take my pot of soup, and I'm going to look at it a little bit differently, and I'm going to start with my 1/2. So I have 1/2 a quart that's full, and 1/2 quart that's empty. So I'm thinking now the pot is only worth 1 quart. So there's 1/2 a quart of soup, and I need to split that quart into 3 groups for my friends. So now I'm going to take what I have, and I'm going to split the whole pot into 3 equal groups. So you're going to notice I split the whole pot, even the empty portion, right? So I have the full portion and the half and the empty half, and I've split them all equally for the 3 friends. And you can see the amount that each friend is going to get. So if you're friend 1, how much of the soup are you going to get? So we had 1/2 a quart, and you're going to get 1/3 of that half. So you're going to end up with 1 portion out of the 6 in the whole pot. Where did I get that 6 from? Well, if we look at the full portion of soup and the empty portion of soup, you're going to notice that the pot, the entire pot, is broken off into 6 groups. So you end up with 1 portion out of the 6 whole in the pot. So a little bit different, but like I said, you're kind of thinking about you have a 1/2 and you're 1 person, so you're going to take 1/3 of that because you're one of the 3 people in this case. So 1/3 of a 1/2 is a 6. But if we're thinking about this picture, this scenario, we're taking your 1/2 a quart, splitting it evenly by 3 people. So you're going to get something smaller than what you started with. You can't have the whole 1/2 quart. You have to share it. So you're taking your 1/2 and you're splitting it into 3 pieces, which is going to end up into a smaller size piece. So you end up with 1/6. So really important that you're always thinking about the total. So when you're finding your answer, you always want to count how many pieces are made in the whole and then count the portion that each person's getting. So in our pot, we were able to make 6 portions, but 3 of them were empty, right? And you're 1 person, so you're going to get 1 serving out of the 6 that the whole pot, if it were full, would have served. So 1/2 quart of soup in a pot split by 3 friends tells us that each friend is going to get 1/6 of a quart from the total pot. And that makes sense because, like I said, if you only have 1/2 a quart and you have to share it, you know your answer has to be smaller than what you started with, right? Because if we only start with 1/2 of a quart, then if we're splitting that, it needs to be smaller, right? There's that division where we are getting smaller. Again, a great resource is to always check it with multiplication. So 1/6 times 3 equals 1/6 times 3/1, which equals 3/6, which hopefully you can see is 1/2. Okay, that will always work. Check, check, check. All right. Let's just kind of review the steps. So the first thing I'm doing every time is I'm drawing a unit square, or in our case, we drew a pot. Shaded what you have. We shaded in that 1/2 quart that we had. Break up your unit square into how many parts you need. I need to share it with 3 friends, so I broke it into 3 equal parts. And then each friend is 1 person, so I counted 1 portion out of the total. In our case, it was 6. All right. Let's look at another example. So there is 1/4 of a loaf of banana bread on the bench. If it is cut into 2 equal parts, how much of the loaf will be in each part? So step 1, draw your unit square. My next step, I have 1/4 of a loaf of banana bread. So I'm going to shade in what I have. I took my unit square and I broke it into fourths, and I have 1/4. I'm then going to take my 1/4 of the bread, and I need to split it into 2 equal parts. That's what the problem asks. So I have 2 equal parts. I break it up into how many parts I needed. How much of the loaf will be in each part? So we need to look at the total. How much is going to be in your total? Your total loaf, 1 part, is 1/8 of the total. Super important you're thinking of it in terms of the total. Each part is half of a fourth, which is really 1/8 of the total. And you'll notice that in a lot of these problems, it asks you specifically for what it is out of the total. So again, if we're just thinking about it with the equation, 1/4 of a loaf of banana bread cut into 2 equal sized pieces equals 1/8 of the total loaf. Check it with multiplication. It will work every time. Make those whole numbers in proper fractions. Simplify to double check your answers. Okay. Some other ones we can look at. If you had 4 friends equally shared 1/3 of a bowl of popcorn, what fraction of the original whole bowl did each friend eat? So this example, I've shaded in 1/3 horizontally, and then vertically I shared it with 4 friends. So each friend is going to get 1 portion out of the 12 portions if the whole bowl was full. The bowl was not full, but if it was. Or you're getting 1/4 of the 1/3 that was left. So you're going to get 1/12. So 1/3 split evenly by 4 friends is 1/12. And like I said, you can kind of think about it as 1/3, and you as one person, one friend, you're getting 1/4 of the 1/3. Remember, we should be thinking a little bit about multiplication. 1/3 times 1/4, because you're one person, gets you the 1/12 as well. So things to think about when you're practicing. Keep double checking with multiplication because these are a little bit tricky, but always start with what you have, shade it in. I like to go horizontally first and then split vertically what you need to split with. 4 friends, 3 servings, 2 equal pieces. So that's kind of the process every time. Start with what you're given, shade it in, and then divide out. And you're always looking for what that 1 portion would be out of the total. So if that whole bowl of popcorn was there, what would you get? Okay. So we're going to keep working on these things. It's a little bit different thinking, but a secret that I'd like to remember is that if I start with a fraction and I'm dividing by a whole number, I always end with a fraction. Okay. Whereas before, when we were talking about the other way around, start with a whole number, you end with a whole number. So just another tip of the trade. And maybe you're seeing some other patterns. Hopefully you're noticing some things with multiplication and some patterns. So feel free to share those out as well. Happy practicing. Look forward to seeing some successes soon. Please reach out if you have any questions or concerns or comments or anything that's going on. And I will talk to you again soon.